this article has been making the rounds in the conservative sphere. Essentially, Yuri Berliner, a 25-year veteran of NPR, was suspended and then inevitably resigned after posting an article critical of NPR to a different publication. It violated a non-compete clause. Now, because this is making the rounds in conservative media, I have a feeling that this is going to end up on the conservative media side, which to them I say, cope. Before we start, if you guys want to support the channel, could you go ahead and hit the like button, subscribe. If you want to go over and subscribe to the Patreon as well, I would appreciate it. There's the replays from the live and the Discord over there. And it would mean a lot because we don't have monetization from YouTube. They denied it. So, but if you guys want to support, that is a way to do it. And I would be really appreciative of it. I'm going to start towards the back of this article and then go back to the beginning because I think that this section that I'm about to read to you is the most concise problem with Yuri's entire logic. He goes on to complain about DEI and, that NPR was taking steps to try and represent marginalized communities in their articles and their pieces because, that's always a bad thing. But it's a really red pill argument. But he states this part, which is just shockingly horrific for a 25-year veteran of journalism. Given the circumstances, speaking in regards to George Floyd's death, given the circumstances of Floyd's death, it would have been an ideal moment to tackle a difficult question. Is America, as progressive activists claim, beset by systemic racism in 2020s in law enforcement, education, housing, and elsewhere? We happen to have a very powerful tool for answering such questions: journalism. Journalism that lets evidence lead the way. But the message from the top was very different. America's infestation with systemic racism was declared loud and clear. It was a given. Here's a problem. This is not journalism. It is not journalism to posit an ignorant question and then try and answer it, right? It's not journalism to go, well, are flat earthers right? No, it's not journalism to do that. It's journalism to go, the earth is round, here's why. In this instance, it's journalism to go, America is systemically racist, here's why. Because there is no other argument to that. When you look at the disparities in law enforcement, for instance, right? People of color get longer sentences, they're less likely to get parole, less likely to get suspended sentences, more likely to serve time, more likely to be arrested, more likely to be wrongfully convicted. The list goes on. And it's the same way in education. You just check the numbers and the disparities between racial groups in education, housing, and all other, in medical, the list goes on. You see those disparities. And if you do not see those disparities, it's because you're ignorant. It's because you're fundamentally not qualified to handle this. And it's it is shocking that a person would present this question as being like, well, is this an actual question that needs to be answered? Look at the body of literature, right? It doesn't, I read this book called How Fascism Works by Jason Stanley. And basically he goes over the rhetorical elements of fascism and what they use. And one of the things that he points out, right, is that in fascism and authoritarianism, but predominantly in that conservative fascist movements, they will have this belief that because I have speech, my speech is valuable. They weaponize the idea of free speech to be able to promote vile speech. It's like if you go to a conference of scientists and they're talking about the earth. They don't start by having a panel of flat earthers and a panel of scientists because the discussion is already ended. And it would be disingenuous to have an article where it's like, well, maybe one of these are right. Maybe we should have this conversation. No, you can answer that. You can, help people understand. But to have this ignorant question that you've posited that you now have to answer is absurd. And that's not journalism. If your take is that you don't know that systemic racism in America exists, you're not a very good journalist, nor should you be covering this, nor should you be complaining about it. There's absolutely no alternative to believing that systemic racism doesn't exist. The degree to which it may exist is up for debate, but insofar that it exists in virtually everything we do, we see the disparities, we see the numbers. So it's absurd that he's attempting to answer a question that's already been answered and using it to undermine what NPR was advocating for activism. That is absurd. That is not journalism to play such a neutral stance that you don't come to any conclusions. Okay, that is just you writing. Like, that's literally, what's the arguments here? You're literally just writing out the arguments. You're not deducting. You're not being a journalist. Let's go back to the beginning of the article, though, because there's some other really interesting parts in this. He tokenizes his mother, stating, "I was raised by a lesbian peace activist mother, and I drive a Subaru." As if the stereotype isn't on the nose enough. He makes a logical fallacy in here. Now, he doesn't explicitly state that this is the outcome. He does, however, strongly imply that NPR's audience has lost conservative viewership because of what NPR is doing, which I don't have the data on that, but I would suspect it's not why. That the reason that Republicans have moved away from NPR is because NPR is reporting things that are more rational than what they're hearing in other places. And as a result, it makes it very difficult to conjoin those two, the cognitive dissonance there. And so you have that fall off of conservative voters, not because NPR is getting more left, but simply because Republicans are getting more, they've shifted the Overton window to the right to such a degree that they're now hanging over in fascist land. So then we get into the alt-right conservative conspiracy things. He states, persistent rumors that the Trump campaign colluded with Russia over the election became the catnip that drove reporting. And he goes on to complain that they interviewed Adam Schiff 25 times, which is the guy that's leading the committee looking into this. It makes sense that you would bring him in to talk to him as much as possible. I would, anytime you want. Why? Because this guy is an important person in this respect and in this investigation. So now he does make a couple of good points, which I'll get to in a second here. But for the most part, it's just an unmitigated disaster. He states, but when the Mueller report found no credible evidence of collusion, NPR's coverage was notably sparse. But here's the thing. Just because we're not able to come to a conclusion about what was said in the meetings with Donald Trump, which we now know, by the way, later on we know what was said or what was going on between them, that there was, in fact, collusion to get Donald Trump elected, as Paul Manafort stated that he shared information, polling data with Russian officials or with Russian assets. And we now know that that's the case. But even at the time, you have 28 or so meetings with Trump advisors, with Russian officials, known Russian officials, or likely Russian assets. That never was explained by the Trump administration. At no point has Trump ever explained why. Well, so we don't know, right? That doesn't exactly exonerate him. Hey, we investigated. He met with them 28 times. He obstructed justice. Well, I guess that exonerates him. No, it doesn't. It's just, hey, we do not have the ability, we do not have the resources to know what they were talking about in these meetings, but these meetings, in fact, did happen. And I think that that's shady as hell. I don't think that that's something that someone needs to go like, well, okay, well, he's exonerated, right? Because I'm willing to bet that this guy didn't come out after OJ and go like, well, he was exonerated. No, the evidence indicates something completely different. Now, he goes on to talk about Hunter Biden's laptop. He states, of course he does. Why wouldn't he? Its contents revealed it's his connection to the corrupt world of multi-million-dollar influence peddling and its possible implications for his father. The laptop was newsworthy. Now, here's the problem, is that the laptop story out the gate, and if you're in journalism for 25 years, you should know this. The laptop out the gate was of question. Did this belong to Hunter Biden? What the origins of where it came from didn't make any sense. The people that wrote the original article in the New York Post did not want their name put on it. Period. They did not want to be involved with this story. And so if you're NPR and other media, not just NPR, but other media sources that have integrity, did not run this because it doesn't pass muster for what they can stand behind, both journalistically and legally. They're setting themselves up to face lawsuits over promoting information that is not verifiable, that doesn't meet their verification standards. And you should know this as a journalist. So there wasn't any evidence out the gate. There has been no evidence since that any of this indicated to it, that there was any of this happening. So you want to publish this information that you can't verify, that is sketchy, that the original authors didn't want any part of, that later find out there's no evidence for any of this happening in there and has not been provided in any degree. You want us to promote this information, this disinformation, as it's going on. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Now, he does make one good point in here, which is NPR's best and most fair-minded journalists said it would be good, or it was good we weren't following the laptop story because I could help Trump. And I would agree. If they were holding this story up because it wouldn't help Trump, yeah, that would be an ethical concern. Unfortunately, for his whole argument here, that may have been their personal beliefs, but this wasn't the concern of news agencies that were skeptical to run this story and that wrote stories opposed to it. The concern was the legal ramifications and the journalistic integrity that came along with it. You want them to publish something that has unfounded, this doesn't make any sense. And you've been here for 25 years. Nobody that was being rational or reasonable would want something or their name to be put on a story that could end up being completely bunk and made up and getting duped to that degree. But not only that, face legal ramifications for doing it. That's absurd. And if you're a journalist, you should know that. Now, it gets crazier, even kookier. He goes on to talk about the origins of the pandemic. Now, I have to be very, very cautious with what I say here. But basically, he goes on to complain that the lab leak theory was shot down pretty much immediately. And I'll get to why that was in a second. But I've talked with people that have PhDs in this, about this topic specifically. I went and researched it a lot so that I could speak with them. Laughter and Light on TikTok is one of them. Side Time with Tracy is another. Both of them have PhDs. I talked with them in varying capacities about it. But I had a conversation with Laughter and Light where we talked about it. It's just the problem with the theory is it's not particularly likely, right? Because both of them were like, or at least Laughter and Light, I don't remember my conversation all that well with Side Time, but the conversation was basically possible, but highly unlikely for a lot of different reasons. Predominantly because of, the genome wasn't reported into the database. There are already very close relatives in Wuhan to this virus. There's a whole host of reasons. The closest known one was found in Laos a couple of years after the pandemic. So the origins of it and then promoting this, just complete, it's not that it doesn't have academic value, right? Because it does. Like academic value, there is academic value in researching this. However, what's happening on social media does not involve academic value in this regards for this particular thing at all. It does not involve academic value. What it involves is people peddling disinformation. And what it involves is the increase, and the reason that this very clearly should not have been something that was talked about in the general population is because they don't have the knowledge on virology to be speaking on this, right? And it only seeks to do damage. We saw an increase in hate crimes, a significant increase in hate crimes after the pandemic started. And most people aren't qualified to talk about this. And I would say that if you're a journalist, going back to this other part, that believes a legitimate journalistic question is that we should ask whether or not systemic racism exists, you're not qualified, or even in the ballpark of reality, to be somehow analyzing the origins of COVID, period. This is a big question in academia. And unless you have the knowledge to talk about this to some degree, to where you at least know the facts, you shouldn't be talking about this in a public capacity, because it only seeks to do damage, right? And especially in this, I do think that this should be investigated, as do most other scientists. I do think this should be investigated. I do think that there are concerns, but insofar as what is the most likely outcome is not this theory. And to allow people to continue to promote it, to undermine, to create disinformation is a significant problem. And for him to be complaining not even from writing a journalistic perspective of saying, hey, look, here's the relevant information. That would be fine. But to say like, we should take this as a serious thing, it's just not. It's just not something that we should be doing. I think that this is a complete embarrassment for someone of 25 years being a journalist to have written that. And I think NPR is better off without him. So everybody have a good day. See you on the next one.